The term development communication was first coined by this lady in 1971, and this is Nora Cubrell from the Philippines. And she's often been referred to as the mother of development communication. And actually that term, development communication, became formalized as an academic discipline based on her work. Refers to facilitate social development. So all NGOs that have been working in Nepal over the decades have all been using development communication in one way or another. And there are many different types of development communication. As a catch-all umbrella term, communication continues to be applied in practice for things like information dissemination, with information related to development issues, education perhaps, behavior change. You may have heard of things like social marketing, advocacy, social mobilization. All these are nuances of communication, and they all come under this catch-all term of development communication in some way. And there are also vastly different models of communication which are employed that use sometimes top-down models of communication, like the first diagram that we looked at there, and what I'm going to call horizontal approaches, which we're going to unpack more in this session, which is not about a powerful source sending messages at people. It's about horizontal dialogue that communication creates within society, within communities. And really that's what Cubrell was stating, what she was trying to get at. Development communication for her was not a tool of control, but it's about social equality. And Cubrell in 2001, she defined development communication as the art and science of communication linked to planned transformation from a state of poverty to one of dynamic socioeconomic growth, greater equity, and the larger unfolding of individual potential. Now, there is some aspects of that definition which are still focused on economic growth and so on. As somebody that is coming from a, I would question a lot of the premises of in sustainable development in any way at all. Actualizing your own place within your community, within your society. February has had a huge influence on my own practice. And you may with his seminal book, really, The Oppressed, in which he explains in detail this concept of critical consciousness. Critical consciousness being a state where we continue in relationship to people, we engage in dialogue for mutual benefit. And why am I talking about Paulo Freire? Well, Freire recognized that this state of being, this state of critical consciousness, is really hard to achieve. We don't often recognize it, its importance, its significance. We don't usually see it. On a collective community level, some sort of catalyst is required to instigate this process of critical consciousness in a facilitated, certainly. This is where I like that we can participate. So instead of focusing on communication as a noun, as a product, as a film, as a drama, or whatever, we must focus on communication and filmmaking as a verb. It's an action, it's a process. Participatory filmmaking then can facilitate us to investigate our own situation through self-reflection, listening to others, engaging in dialogue with others, developing new understandings of our situation and awareness, and ultimately, it can help us to change our own behavior towards ourselves, to other people, and I would also say to other living things and to the planet at large. So the characteristics of participatory filmmaking help in the development of a community's cultural identity. To act as a vehicle for participant or citizen self-expression, to facilitate problem articulation, to unpack problems and learn about them, to serve as a tool for the diagnosis of a community's problems, and also then to lead to collective action. And now these are grand themes, these are grand aims. I will try to give you some concrete case study examples in a moment of how some of these things, some of these ideas can actually be implemented and actualized within real life communities and societies. An early model of participatory communication was proposed back in 1982 by a person called Thunberg. And it's called the spiral of interaction. And straight away you can see that model is quite different in concept to the other models of mass communication we looked at the start of this talk. There are 4 functions of communication which are identified in this model, and you can see them laid out at the bottom there. The expressive function. Individuals and groups express themselves in order to create an identity for themselves. The social function. By communicating together, people create a sense of community and strengthen that sense of community. The information function. Through communication, individuals can share information with each other and thereby increase their own knowledge and collectively the knowledge of others within their community. And then the control activation function. Communication leads to joint action or collective action that is intended to modify the local environment in some way and improve the situation of individuals and their groups and their communities. Open also then offers us further thoughts about the participatory communication approach. And he gives us 3 principles here. So first of all, the entry point of our communication is the specific realities and problems of local groups, which are resistance, also perhaps a lack of organizational capacity. It's characterized by these horizontal communication processes that motivate and motivate us to change themselves in their own situation. That process can occur through communication networks at the local level, initiatives at the local level. privileged groups in decision making. And that's almost the opposite of what we looked at in the models in the beginning. Okay, power has changed its location within this type of communication. Let's just step sideways then and come to some approaches to filmmaking that are not necessarily drawn from development theory, as the models I've presented so far, but some that come from film theory and filmmaking theory. And I want to talk about ethnographic films just briefly. Participatory filmmaking and ethnographic filmmaking is my own practice. Ethnography is generally described as a study of peoples and cultures, with their customs and their habits and their mutual differences, of course. And it's a dimension of anthropology, which is the study of human societies. So ethnographic film, then, is a way of documenting and investigating people and their cultures. And I would also argue that animals and the landscape can be explored in film with an ethnographic mindset as well. Anthropology meets zoology. One of the examples I'm going to show you from my own work focuses on animals. And then we move into the area of anthrozoology, actually. The author Hyder makes a very strong case for resisting the temptation to try to define ethnographic film as an absolute, but rather to look for various attributes or dimensions that affect ethnographicness in film. And I think that's a really nice way of going about things. We can go down a cul-de-sac or into a dead end by trying to find definitive definitions about lots of things, where in fact we would be much better off trying to think about the characteristics of something which make it ethnographic in principle. Okay, some of these principles, we immerse ourselves into the setting in the community, or the person's life as the subject. We build a relationship to the point where our presence no longer affects the way people behave. Let me say that one again. When we're making ethnographic films, as soon as you turn up anywhere with a camera, people will inherently behave differently. Even though they don't mean to, they'll play up to the camera a little bit, do things differently. You need to immerse yourself over a long period of time so that your presence in a community is sort of taken for granted. You're not a novelty anymore. And slowly people then will start to get back to the things that they have to do in their life to survive, if we're talking about marginalised and disadvantaged communities. And once you build that type of relationship with people and you are sort of become part of that community, then you can start to film things in an authentic way. Meaning, what people do are the same things they would do if you weren't there yourself. Okay? That's easy to say, and these are difficult things to bring about as a filmmaker. So longevity of engagement with and in the subject and their environment is absolutely essential. And we can break down ethnographic film into 3 subcategories as well. Direct cinema, which is non-interventionist. The filmmaker remains unseen and detached from events, and the film has no commentary. So many direct cinema films are shot with a camera that's locked off, because even the movement of a camera starts to imply the filmmaker's presence. So a lot of direct cinema films shot with a locked off camera where the action just happens within the front of the lens. And you minimize your presence as the filmmaker as far as you possibly can. Now, of course, you'll say, well, as soon as you point a camera at something, you're making decisions. Of course you are. But you try to minimize your interpretation of something artistically as much as possible. And you're simply just trying to document what is happening in that community in a non-interventionist way. And then we have observational cinema, which de-emphasizes persuasion to give a sense of what a given situation is like, but the filmmaker's presence might be more obvious, and the film may even incorporate some interviews. So when I say de-emphasizes persuasion, as a filmmaker, you're not taking a poetic approach. You're not crafting an artwork through your film that is loaded with your own artistic expression. You're still trying to give a sense of what a place is like authentically without your artistic interpretation of it. But your presence as the filmmaker might be slightly more obvious. So your choice of shots and the way you cut a sequence together, that's okay. That can be there because you are presenting what you think is the important parts of the subject that's in front of you. And you might incorporate interviews into observational cinema to give an extra dimension to the information that the person watching your film is able to take on board. And then we come to cinema verite. And cinema verite is translated as truthful cinema. The term cinema verite, Jean Rouch from France, if you're familiar with Jean Rouch's filmmaking. Truthful cinema, and this is the interaction between the filmmaker and the subject. And that interaction is acknowledged. So we quite often see the filmmaker actually, as a documentary maker, placing themselves into the film. And it's their interaction with the subject matter and the subjects of their film. That could be people, it could be animal, it could be landscape. But the filmmaker's interaction with the subject matter is much more apparent in the film. And actually, these three types of approaches, in different ways, have been evident in the films that I've been watching and my colleagues have been watching over the last month or so, the submissions that have been made to this film festival. And some of the discussions that we have been having as a jury on the film submitted relate to some of these underlying principles. Maybe I can talk more about that at another day, Saraj, when you come to. So, ethnographic filmmaking. So, I presented some different models there. I presented some very grand concepts about changing society or people using film as a self-reflective tool to change themselves and to change their life situation. Let me try and give some specific examples and some context to that. So, as a development communication practitioner and an ethnographic documentary filmmaker, I seek to work with marginalized, disadvantaged, and what I'm calling declining peoples and cultures. When I say declining peoples and cultures, I mean those parts of our cultural heritage which is slowly ebbing away and is disappearing slowly from our countries and our communities. Sometimes our memories even, perhaps. So declining peoples and their cultures, animals in the environment, promoting discussion and dialogue around issues which directly affect them. So I seek, let me just repeat that, seek to engage, to promote discussion and dialogue around issues which directly affect marginalized and disadvantaged or declining people in some way. And I periodically amend the way I describe myself in my work as I learn through life. But this is the definition I sort of put down on paper for this workshop. I work locally and globally with communities and social development organizations using participatory methods or ethnographic methods. And if you want to, you can find out more about my work at my website, marginalvoices.org. I should stress from the outset that as a development communication practitioner and ethnographic and documentary filmmaker, I work in slightly different ways. Every project I've ever worked on is unique and it's bespoke. It's slightly different to any other that I've worked on. And one of the key concepts about differing approaches is my positioning in relation to the community or the issue at the center of that engagement. And I like to think of this on a spectrum. So let me just explain this concept for a moment. So I've got the community or the issue at the center of the engagement on this spectrum from internal to external. And that internal to external is where I am positioning myself as the filmmaker. So can you read that? Is it legible to you or not? I'll read it out anyway. This presentation, by the way, I have exported as a PDF and given to the committee so they can make it available to you through their website. And you can go back and look at some of these links in your own time. So on the external side, I've got something like a news report there. And I'm not talking about an investigative documentary that is factual-based, news-based. I'm talking, those short, sharp clips about the news where something's happened and a reporter turns up and gives an interpretation of what's happening, minute, 2 minutes long on the news, and then it's gone. And that is, of course, the presentation of facts through an editorial lens. And we need to be aware that the news is a very strong editorial perspective. Then we come to expository, and expository is a term coined by Bill Nichols. Anyone familiar with Bill Nichols' modes of documentary filmmaking? So another important person to look up, maybe, looking at different approaches to filmmaking. So the expository approach, and the expository approach is when we know the documentary we want to make. We know what the story is. We know the message we want to convey through our documentary. We know what the outcome is going to be. And so we go out and we decide who we're going to interview to put that story together. So it's a construction job. We go out and we get the pieces of the jigsaw, and then we construct our story by putting those jigsaw pieces together. And quite often, we then put a narration over the top of it, a voiceover. And expository is often talked about in the context of the voice of God. This narrator, which is telling us things that we are supposed to just accept and not challenge. And that happens so much in documentary making. And so these things are at the external end, where we as filmmakers, we're not really engaging with that subject matter particularly, right? We're coming at it from an external perspective. Then we move down in the middle here to investigative documentary making. And this is where we sense that there is a really good story somewhere. We've heard something, or we know a family, or a person, or a situation, a landscape that's changing in some way. It could be the formation of glacial lakes in the Himalayas. It's really good. What it is, take investigate. And we're going to start. We're going to do first. We're going to talk to you first. So we start the process, and that leads to we go to a different place. Slowly, the story unfolds for us in a negative way. So the verb in this is really investigation. Investigate through the process of filmmaking, and ultimately, we hope that we have some sort of narrative which is engaging to you. And that narrative doesn't have to be a strong linear narrative. It can be quite impressionistic and atmospheric about a situation or about a space. That's also narrative, isn't it, in a different way. And then we come towards the end where most of my work is focused. So ethnographic filmmaking. In ethnographic filmmaking, I've already said one of the key principles is engagement with your subject matter over a long period of time. So the verb that I have here is immersion. We immerse ourselves into that situation for a long period of time till we can start to film in an ethnographic way that is a genuine reflection of the situation that we're in. And then right down on the left-hand side here, we have participatory filmmaking. And participatory filmmaking is where we cease to be the filmmaker ourselves and we facilitate the process of filmmaking for other people. And we support other people to investigate their own situation through the process of filmmaking. I talked earlier on about development communication. Participatory development communication doesn't just have to use film, of course. It could use drama, it could use songwriting, storytelling, creative writing, any of those other medium. But we're focused on film at the moment. So talking about participatory filmmaking, we facilitate other people to explore their own situation, and then maybe to use their film, if it actually comes out in a sort of a tangible way, to use that as a way of engaging in dialogue with other people. And sometimes those other people might be within their own community, who are maybe gatekeepers to change or oppressors of them and others in some way. And sometimes it might be people who are outside of their immediate community to engage in a dialogue. So that's participatory filmmaking. And what I'd like to do now is to give you 3 case studies, quite brief case studies. 1 investigative, 1 ethnographic, and then 1 participatory. And they are all primarily from Nepal, actually. So, investigative filmmaking. This is a project called Disability and Development. The aim of this project was to help young people in the UK and in Ireland to have a broader worldview and a deeper understanding of the issues affecting other young people around the world, so that as they grow into adults and become responsible members of society, not just nationally, but internationally and globally, and take on important jobs or whatever path they find in life, they do so with a greater understanding of global issues and not just with a narrow Western-focused mindset. So this project was funded by UK Aid and coordinated in partnership with 5 other disability organisations. And the project explored the interconnections between disability and development, and especially disability and poverty. If you are living in poverty, you are much more likely to suffer a disability in your life, either physical or mental or emotional. And if you have a disability, you're much more likely to slip into poverty. The connections between disability and poverty are incredibly strong. Interconnected, absolutely. So I made 7 films traveling around the world. And those 7 films explored the impacts of disability on young people's lives and explored the causes. How had young people become disabled? And then it unpacked their situation. 7 films. 1, Agent Orange victims in Vietnam. Children suffering brain damage at birth, genetic defects because of Agent Orange. Are you familiar with Agent Orange in Vietnam? Agent Orange was a chemical called dioxin used by America during the Vietnamese War to kill the foliage so that the Viet Cong had nowhere to hide. Great, but it's incredibly toxic to human beings. It stays in the soil and the water sources for years and years and years. It creates gene mutations that get passed from one generation to the next, into the next, disappear and then reappear in generations to come. So, Agent Orange in Vietnam, malnutrition in Ethiopia, brain damage in Bolivia and Tanzania. Bolivia and Tanzania, under-resourced health services where women giving birth did not have the proper facilities and resources, and children were born with brain damage because of those lack of facilities. Spinal injury in Nepal. Girls falling off of the terraces, cutting grass, whatever. And then earthquake victims in Haiti. And then in Ireland, a visual impairment, a girl born with glaucoma at birth. So these films, about 10 minutes each, they were embedded into a curriculum-linked resource, 24-page learning resource aimed at post-primary or secondary schools. And teacher training was provided with this resource, and the films were embedded into these active learning sessions. So you can see here the different activities for young people to do around the films. And one of the sessions, for example, looked at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and used one of these films as a starting point to unpack an understanding about that UN convention, for example. So I'm going to just play you a clip from this film. I think it's about 4 minutes long, just to give you a sense of this type of work.
घरमा बसेको भएदेखि त हुल्चेरै जाँदैन। पहिलो कुरो एक ठाउँमा जले उचालेर खाटमा राख्दै खाटमा, भुइँमा राख्दै भुइँमा, जहाँको त्यही भइन्थ्यो, केही गर्न सक्दैन थियो र सक्दिन पनि। त्यहाँ अब वातावरण नै छैन, गाउँको स्थिति अब पाहाडमा भएपछि त्यस्तै हुल्चेरै जाँदैन। अनि अब पकाउन आमा बाबाहरूलाई सहयोग गर्न त कसरी सहयोग गर्थेँ र मैले अब हुल्चेरमा बसेर गाउँ घाँस काट्न जाने कुरो भएन, मेला जाने कुरो भएन, घरमा हुल्चेर पुर्दैन, खाना बनाउन पनि सम्भव छैन। हुल्चेर पुर्ने वातावरण भएको भए खाना यताउता पनि हुन्थ्यो, तर त्यो पनि छैन। केही पनि गर्न सक्दैन थियो घरमा त। त्यही बस्यो, खायो, पकाएर दिएछ खायो, नदियो भोगेपछि त्यस्तै गरेर रोएरै बित्थ्यो होला सायद जिन्दगी। अहिलेको यहाँ त म एकदमै खुसी छु र अब जस आफूलाई हुल्चेर यस्तो ठाउँ छ, यहाँ चाहिँ सकिन्छ आफैले हुल्चेर यस्तो ठाउँ हुनु पर्यो पहिलो त। अनि ठाउँ भएपछि आफूले पानी बोक्ने, खाना बनाउने, लुगा धुनेदेखि लिएर आफै आफ्नो काम आफै गरेर अब जस पछि गर्ने कार्यहरू सबै जब गरेर आफ्नो जीवन पाल्न सकिन्छ, सक्छु त। गाउँमा भएको भए त्यो स्थिति सक्छु भन्ने आँट गर्नै सकिन्थेन। देश अहिले त कलेजमा म्यानेजमेन्ट सब्जेक्ट लिएर पढिरहेको छु कि भविष्यमा देश अफिस म्यानेजमेन्ट भएर एउटा अफिसमा राम्रो काम गरेर र गाउँघरमा जस्तो डिजाबलले केही पनि गर्न सक्दैन, यस्तो यिनीहरू भनेको हामीले अरूले दिएर खाने हो भन्ने भएको त्यो जनताहरूलाई चेतना फैलाउनु देखाउनु छ कि मैले पनि डिजाबलले पनि केही गर्न सक्छ, पढेर ठाउँ पाए, अवसर पाए उनीहरूले पनि अरू एबलभन्दा कमी हुँदैन भन्ने कुरा तिनीहरूलाई म देखाउन चाहन्छु, सक्छु।
So this story of Lakshmi was intercut with a story of a girl called Anita who's living in the mid-hills, who is basically housebound because obviously she can't use a wheelchair in that situation. It's investigative filmmaking, right? It's my engagement with young people and their families, and how that has led to a surgeon. I worked through NGOs who had a long history of engagement with all of the children in all of the films. And the purpose of the project was explained to young people and their families. They were given time to think about this, if they wanted to tell their story or not, and if they did want to tell their story, what would they like to show? How would they like to be seen? And all of the young people suggested things from their daily lives that they thought were important. So there's elements of participation in it, but it's not a participatory film in that sense. And ultimately, as the filmmaker, I have all the control over how that material is actually shot and edited and then used. But I would suggest that my investigative filmmaking is flavoured very much by my participatory and ethnographic work. And I ask people just to go about their normal daily life, and I try and then just work gently around them. I don't intervene, I don't ask people to do anything or to redo anything. And furthermore, I try to let the pictures tell the story and only supplement it with interview when it's necessary. A second example here then. So this is now an example of ethnographic filmmaking. And this work called Brick Mule explored the use of film ethnography as an action research methodology which is based on Paulo Freire's principles, where in this case, Hali communities whose lives and livelihoods are heavily dependent on working equines, and their equines, I would say, engaged in participatory ethnographic filmmaking as part of ongoing activities by project partners that was seeking transformation in working equine welfare. So we're talking about mules primarily here. But improved well-being of working mules also equates to economic stability, greater economic stability of equine-only communities. And the project involved two stages. So I undertook ethnographic filmmaking over the course of a whole year. I started just northeast of Delhi in a town called Meerut, where the mules that work in Nepal are actually bred and reared. From there, they go to a huge annual equine fair at Barabanki, 5,000 to 7,000 animals bought and sold every year. Traders from Nepalganj go down to Barabanki, stay for a week to 10 days, buy up animals, walk them for 4 days back to Nepalganj. They stay in Nepalganj. Barabanki is in October time. They stay in Nepalganj until December. And then when the brickmaking season starts in the Kathmandu Valley, they travel on truck to the Kathmandu Valley until the monsoon starts, May, June time. And they might do that type of seasonal work for 4, 5, 6 years or so. And quite often mules will then be sold as pack animals in the high mountains. And sometimes they might cut out the brick factories and go straight as pack animals into the high mountains. And I followed the journey to Arket and then tracked up the Buddha Gandaki to the base of Manaslu. It resulted in a 64-minute observational ethnographic film. So this is me engaging with communities at different parts of the project. The top pictures and the one on the left is actually before any filming took place. This is just engaging with communities, building up a relationship. And the bottom right picture there is in Nepalganj. This is some of the mules' life in Nepalganj. When I went to Nepalganj, I spent many hours, days just sitting in the tea shop actually. And slowly people asked me, what was I doing? Why was I there? Well, I'm interested in working mules, and slowly the relationship starts to build up. And the people say, oh, well, you should go and look at that, and look at this. And as that relationship develops, then slowly the filmmaking process can begin. and you can see some of the situations. I'm going to show you a clip of this in a moment. Then, of course, into the brick factories, and then up into the high mountains following the mule's life. Let me show you a clip from this. I've got a 4 or 5 minute clip, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about how the project was used for positive change. So this is an ethnographic film which documents a story, but without, there's no narration, there's no non-diegetic music, there's no music thrown over the top of it. As my interpretation of the situation, it's presenting things as they are. The soundscape is crafted, and there are many different levels of sound even being used in there authentically from that location to soundscape. That film was then screened multiple times within the many diverse communities that are involved in the mule's life, from Meru all the way through Nepal and mountains. And this is a tool so that it allowed participants to actually see themselves and their mules on screen, to actually step back from their lives and see themselves in a different way. Think about Paulo Freire's critical consciousness idea. They saw parts of the mules' lives that they'd never seen before. And this is really important. Communities in Nepalganj, they never see what happens to a mule in the high mountains, which part of this film depicts. Or they never see where the mules are bred and reared, where they come from. They only see a little bit of the story. And the only connecting thing between all these diverse communities are the mules that pass through them over the course of their lives. And that's really important, because that allowed people to develop a much greater sense of what their animals were, who they were as living things. And they saw their own attitudes and behaviours to their mules on the screen. And focus groups discussions were facilitated by an NGO called Animal Nepal and their community outreach team. And it developed what I've described Paulo Freire's critical consciousness. People made their own observations, they questioned themselves and each other, and it promoted an ongoing discussion and dialogue within their community. And then with Animal Nepal's outreach team's support, the communities actually produced a set of guiding principles to redefine their relationship with their mules going forward. this was actually summed up in these 5 different areas. So let's see the screen now. Keeping equines free from hunger and thirst, keeping equines free from discomfort, keeping equines free from pain, injury, and disease, keeping equines free from fear and distress, and allowing equines to express their normal behavior as animals. The focus group discussions were recorded. We also used rating scales with people to get a sense of what knowledge they felt they had before and after participating in this project. And that was all documented. And it showed really important changes in people's perceived knowledge and their attitudes towards their own animals. And it redefined their relationship with their animals. So as a filmmaker, you can see from these 2 examples, I'm often, when I'm working and engaged in social change, I'm working very closely in collaboration with communities and with NGOs as well, and with sociologists. The films that I produce are very seldom just standalone films. They're usually for a context, for a reason. I do, maybe with a little bit of re-editing, put them into film festivals sometimes, so they can be seen by a wider audience. But that's not the primarily motivation factor for the films that I produce. Evidencing the impact of our work is extremely important, and I want to emphasize strongly that as filmmakers that are interested in social change, it's not enough just to make a film and sit back in a self-congratulatory manner and say, great, my film's in a film festival. So what if it's not actually producing some sort of tangible social change in some way? So there's an article, an academic paper, which goes into this project and the underlying methodologies in much more detail. You can find it at this link if you're interested in having a look at that. And I'd like to just give you this last example here called Community Voices, which is a participatory communication case study. I lived full-time in Nepal from 1990 to 1995. And in 1994, I instigated a participatory communication initiative with inner city youth groups in Patna. I was quite young at the time, but even then, really uncomfortable with the top-down approaches to communication that my NGO was using. I was intrigued by Paulo Freire's ideas and concepts of participatory communication, and I wanted to explore those in real life. And this project lasted a whole year, and it followed this process. Through the Lalitpur municipality, I established connections with 2 urban youth groups based around libraries, actually, one in Guj Bahal and one in Nag Bahal. The 2 groups worked independently from each other, but they both used photography initially to document their own community, looking for issues or themes of importance to them as young people. Digital cameras didn't exist at the time, so everything was shot on film and developed. And then they used their photographs as discussion material, laying them out on the floor, talking them through, slowly grouping the photographs into ideas and themes. And over the course of about 4 weeks, they slowly narrowed down their themes until they felt they had common ground around the most important issue affecting them collectively as a group of young people in their community. And in Guji Bahal, that was teenage girls. They were mostly teenage girls in this group. Teenage girls being married, not being married, or career, within a household. And in Nag Bahal, it was the abuse of alcohol and domestic violence in the home, which often influenced young people and teenagers who then ended up on the street drinking themselves because they didn't want to be in their house because it was prevalent with domestic violence. So, having decided on their theme, each group then spent a number of weeks investigating their issues. They invited relevant specialists to come and talk to them. They spoke with community leaders, with sympathetic elders, and through this process, they built up community support and a support network of people around them. And that led to action. So each group then decided the best way to use participatory communication actions to get these issues within their community to create dialogue, hopefully leading to some sort of positive change. And in Guji Bihar, they decided to do a street drama, and in Nag Bihar, they decided to make a television drama and then screen it through a local cable television network that an entrepreneur had actually set up within Bihar. Facilitators were brought in to support each group, script writing and testing of their scripts, acting, setting up street theatre, filming, editing, and so on. Each group faced significant challenges along the way. Many people, well, some powerful people in their communities did not want them to work on these projects because they were very happy with the power imbalance and they didn't want that to be changed, the power balance. They didn't want their role in society to be changed. Old men drinking, playing cards didn't want people questioning their behaviour, and so on, and so on. So it took genuine determination and collective strength to proceed. But they did proceed. They presented their drama and the street drama. And let me just play you a little bit from the film element of it. Anyone here know Ashish Mala? Ashish, yeah? You'll see a young version of Ashish Mala.
In our society, almost everywhere, parents are being drunk and they create conflict everywhere. In the outside of the home or in their home, they create almost all the time when they are drunk, conflict.
And we are doing a video, we are making a video film, and this is the third day of the shooting, and almost, I think 75% is complete. Now all are here engaged, all are artists, they are writers, they are everything, and
set up in these people by inviting members of the community to they explain the purpose of the media and read the script. The comments and suggestions of community members specialists such as the drug social worker. In this way, participants involve the local community in the media planning and increase their own knowledge about local social issues.
I help as an expert. I teach them how to write the script, what is the direction, what is the acting, how to act. And when I did, now I think all are expert, and they are doing themselves.
So they presented their drama through street drama and then through this network. And then over the next few weeks, they facilitated focus group discussions with their community where they talked about the talked about their drama, and brought the issues out to parents. And the discussion then spread beyond the focus groups, the wider community, and people were talking about things through the rest of their daily lives, not just during the focus groups. And in fact, assessment specialists conducted interviews at the time, one-on-one interviews, to try to get the real, tangible impact within those communities. And that was using different sociology tools. I would say the issues presented reflected the reality of their community that needed to be addressed. Community members said we learned new things. The levels of increased self-confidence within participants were noticeable. An increased sense of belonging and cohesion for participants, feeling better supported within their community. And the reason I showed you that is this was 28 years ago. In July this year, I went back to Nepal and Gujarat Bahar. And how am I going to engage with these people? Could I find any of these original youth who are now grown up with their own children? Went with a colleague, we went to Nepal and I saw a couple of guys and I was trying to explain, and it was a bit hard. And then a guy pulled up on a motorbike, and as soon as he took his helmet off, he said, "Michael." And I said, "Navin." And after 28 years, he still knew my name and I knew his name. It's very indicative of the project as a whole. Next week, we're now having a reunion, 28 years later. We've made connections with about 2/3 of the original participants. He's coming on Manisharma. We've got connections with on Manisharma. The lady who did the evaluation for us, who was in a first job at the time, is now head of department in the British Foreign Office in the British Embassy. She did the same evaluation process that she did 20 years ago. And we're going to look at the long-term social impacts. And these are challenge their parents. What will happen to you after that project finished over the next few years, and 5 years, and 10 years? Now that you're preparing yourselves, how you, I'm not I'm interested in how you're experiencing your own youth. So this going back and finding out the impacts of the films that we make is incredibly important if we are going to be filmmakers for social change. You can look at this in your own time. This is the communication model that I developed based on this work in Patton, a model of participatory communication that describes the process in a diagram that I've just talked you through. You can have a look at that in your own time if you like. And if anybody's interested, I work at the University of South Wales in the UK, in Cardiff. I teach participatory, ethnographic, documentary filmmaking. Here, master's students, we have a nice Masters by Research program available. So if anybody's interested in these areas, my email is there. Please feel free to contact me and support you as best I can. So in summary, we looked at the evolution of participatory communication in a very, very short, concise way. I've shown you some selected theoretical underpinnings of the communication models. We've looked at 3 case studies. And I would just like to put this sentence really as my main conclusion that making a film is not enough if we want to be a catalyst for social change. It's a festival. But so what if they don't actually do that? Festival. We want to see change in our society as a result of the work that we do. We must think very carefully about how we engage with our subjects. Where do we position ourselves in relation to our subject matter? And what methodologies do we do? Do we take participatory methodologies? Sometimes, perhaps. We don't have to always work in participatory ways. We can do good work in other places along that spectrum. but we must be critically aware of where we are positioning ourselves and know the difference between making a film about something and facilitating people to make a film about themselves. Different things. And then we've looked at how we can use our films to engage society and create discussion and dialogue. So I'm going to finish there. I'm very happy to take any questions or have a discussion if that's relevant. Thank you.
Hi, Michael. That was a beautiful presentation. Thank you. And me, I don't belong to film, but so I don't belong to film industry, but and like a simple question. Whenever we watch movies, whenever we make movies, we try to bring, we target to add the social, it as scenes. But then is there any possibilities that people get influenced by negative aspect of the society, like discriminations or the negative society? Yeah? No?
Could you express it in terms of somebody else? Critically asking.
Okay, so whenever we watch movies, we always like to read it for the social things. And then through movies, through film, we are in this situation.
Absolutely, yeah. I be careful what I say here. My two jury members and I, we sat outside and we began our deliberations. And inevitably, there are films that, with the best intentions, present stereotypes that society has. Either because we don't engage properly to fully understand the story. We think we know what the story is and we make it from an external perspective, and we end up just actually using inappropriate language or presenting people in inappropriate ways, which just further stereotype them and actually dehumanize them in society. So absolutely, I would agree with you, yes. And that's really what I'm talking about on this section. You have to be critically aware of where you are positioning yourself. Don't make the film with people.
So science was the most did you in last one did you ever feel any music in your previous one? Did you ever
Of a situation to influence your film, for example, I'm not telling you to think or feel. I'm trying to show you the reality of what I saw, and there's difficult things to see in there, and sometimes there's really positive things to see in there in terms of people's relationships with their animals. I want you to make your judgments and form your own emotions around it, and not be influenced by me putting. This is a really important point you've raised here, that when I look at films in film festivals, I'm sitting on another selection committee for Ethnographic in Paris at the moment as well, so I've been watching many films over the last few months. Non-diegetic music. Diegetic, do we understand the terms diegetic and non-diegetic? Diegetic is things that sound like you put on subjects and they're not hearing music piped over the top of what they're doing. And there are ways you can introduce music in the context of a film, people playing a radio or playing a guitar, it then becomes music. Soundscape for me is when I'm unsure, I go to the soundscape. The soundscape is crafted, but looking for three clear their voice. Their voice is part of the film. I'm looking for action sounds. Things that people do. It's no recorded those and put them into the edit to enhance the sounds because the camera too hard to pick up using onboard cameras. You see this, and then the bottom level is slowly. So tones rather than melodies is the way that I work, and maybe that influences my decision making. If I see a documentary film that has got non-diegetic music thrown over the top of it in quite a crude way that is dictating to me how I should make the film, I'm already on the back foot.
Could you explain about the remarkable or creative situation during the filmmaking which affects your film?
The difficult situations for me. Yeah, I mean, there's many aspects to that. This film I made with the mules, I'm traveling on my own over the course of a year, not every day, but in periods of intensive filmmaking over the course of many times I don't know where I'm sleeping that night. Everything I have with me is on my back, and I'm trying to look after my camera. So there's logistical issues of making sure I don't have pieces of kit lost along the way. I'm using quite small cameras so that I can actually be mobile. So that's one issue. Safety is another issue in that, and some of those situations are they're physically difficult places to be at times. Do you know, I find filmmaking is emotional, but when I'm filmmaking, some of these scenes with mules that are dying and so on, they are emotional, but they're much more emotional in the edit than they are when I'm filming, because I'm so engrossed on what I'm filming and getting the shot. And usually when I'm filming, because I don't intervene in anything that's happening, I'm filming, but actually my mind is 20 seconds ahead, thinking, like, what's going to be next? Where do I need, as soon as I've got this shot, where do I need to move myself to get that next shot? So I'm, all this is going on in your head when you're shooting, so I'm not really emotionally engaging myself with what's happening in front. It's only when you get the edit and you start putting these things together, and that could be a year later. But as soon as I see a shot on the edit, suddenly the emotions, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, those emotions come through, and that's when I find it sometimes quite difficult to deal with the material.
We saw this kind of meeting with avoiding those technology के भन्छ त्यसलाई टेक्नोलोजीहरू चाहिँ अलिकति एभोइड गर्नु त्यो फिल्म नै फिल्मको त्यो जुन सेन्स हुन्छ त्यो चाहिँ अलिकति हराउँछ कि भन्ने कसरी
Could technology thing? This is
नयाँ टेक्नोलोजीहरू चाहिँ हामीले
no technology for cooking.
नयाँ क्यामेरा
No camera. Equipment. Lights I don't use. Well, I have a small light that I put on top of my camera. Otherwise, I'm traveling on my own. I can only take what I can carry. I don't have a tripod. A lot of my shots are quite low angle because I have a little, what we call a beanbag, little pillow about this big. I put it on the floor and put my camera on it for stability. That's my tripod, or I put it on the wall and put my camera on. I use a small camera. Digital camera is fantastic these days for the quality, but they allow you to be really, really mobile. I think I used 3 different cameras on this film, actually, and a drone as well. Well, there's 2 issues to that. One, you can't travel with those big things. The second issue is this. Your relationship with your subject changes when you're walking with a massive big camera. When you have a small camera, you can work in a much gentler way. That's really
Yeah, my before giving us about just regarding that. To know that since you're also there, also some kind of preference regarding the position of the maker or making the things. Then you just so that technically see by the filmmaker while it's a particular filmmaking.
Yeah. So my films are not exposing issues where we don't seek people's permission because we're exposing them for the things that they're doing that are oppressive to other people. And so let's leave that side of things apart for a moment. My films are made with people. So ethical approval for people to be in my films is there, absolutely. Many universities, for example, have an ethical sheet. And before you speak to anybody, they have to sign this sheet and everything. Now, this is really problematic for people like me as ethnographic filmmakers, because you can't engage with the community if your first point of contact is sign that, sign your life away. It doesn't work, does it, right? So sometimes you just work slowly, you build a relationship, you start filming, and there comes a point when you have to then seek that ethical approval. Now, on screen, I can ask people on screen, I'm making this film for this reason, or whatever, or if it's ethnographic filmmaking, and people can give their consent on screen, that's often very appropriate. Without wanting to be patronising, there are still communities in Nepal where people don't have great literature. They can't read a lot of stuff. So that's a really nice way of getting ethical permissions from people. But also, you need to have a dynamic, what's called dynamic consent process. What I mean by that is, justice will say, have you got your sheets filled? Have they given permission? Great, we've got those. We can do anything we want with this film now because they signed for it, right? What happens if 3 or 4 months into the process, people start to feel uncomfortable? We have to respect that. So we have to have a dynamic consent process that you revisit consent 3 or 4 times, however often it's needed. As people engage in a project, like this participatory filmmaking work, for example, when people start to get really into the project, the full awareness of what they're doing and the implications of it start to become more apparent to them, perhaps. So they have to be able to revisit their involvement and their consent for their imagery or words to be used. So that dynamic consent process is really important.
Like totally a research paper.
But films go on TV, people give their permission. Part of the consent process is you're telling people exactly how you're going to use that material, in what context. Will it be used locally, nationally, internationally? Will it be used in film festivals? Will it be used for 1 year and that's it? Will it be used for 5 years or indefinitely? Will the material that you have recorded of them be only used in one edit and that's it? Or will that material be available for other people just to re-edit in other ways? And all these sorts of things have to be accounted for when you think about the ethics of material.
No, I understand another point. It's like you have this year software it's almost completely consistent, and I just like to bring another idea about merge banking, because all of you literally talking about something inconsistent and another banking actually.
Yeah.
And then you sites, it's something like okay, if you need for a particular kind of chain, it could be on some level, let's say investigative or let's say some other kind of exposure to your industry. Then we bring highlight roles, then if for instance, if me as a filmmaker writing that this is for you, then of course this is to follow some kind of political practical tools to make my film industry or let's say expository or urban identity or ethnography. But if I as an artist am making a film, and in this context, if I subscribe saying my sample like what you have said that filmmaking is an art, it's not a science. If you care about films, then eventually you make a great film and okay forwards to grow.
Yeah.
For example, say like that. But in this context, if we borrow that Polar's idea, and even our parents have another idea, in this context, then it's really necessary to follow all those specific tools to become a film.
No, this is what I said, that let's not try to have a definitive definition of what is an ethnographic film. It's what makes the film ethnographic, what's ethnographicness in principle. That's what I was trying to get at. So, I mean, there are some principles. I think longevity of engagement with your subject matter is an important aspect of ethnographic filmmaking. I would say that in ethnographic filmmaking, you do want to minimize your own artistic interpretation. If you want to be a poetic filmmaker, you can take a poetic approach to filmmaking in documentary, absolutely. But diagrams are just to help us understand the concepts a little bit more. When people start pushing diagrams to the point of arguing over this or that, they cease to be useful to us, I think. So I'm just laying that out as a way of just giving you some sort of structure to think about how you go about your own filmmaking. But some beautiful documentaries that are poetic in their treatment. And that's absolutely fine. If we're individuals, we have a perspective on the world. We have human rights. We have a right to express our opinion about something in a poetic way, if we want to do that. And some beautiful documentaries do that.
Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions for you. One is perhaps when the Parliament was from the Parliament individual behind this
Can you just somebody help me to understand exactly what it is?
She is asking that like how far the military government basically decides to the partners like how far they are contributing the concept you are working on.
Well,
The committee,
the paradigm of developing
yeah. Yeah.
How much do we find these developing actors?
Yeah. So I actually had quite a lot more theoretical underpinning, which I cut out today because I wanted to spend more time on the case studies. But you can find that. When I worked in Nepal in the 1990s, I worked at a major international INGO who talked about participatory processes. But when it came to communication, it was completely different. They treated communication in an advertising publicity manner, not participatory in any sense, sending messages to people. Either sending messages to people in villages about this is how you should look after your health, this is how you should deal with crop rotation or whatever, this is how you should use visually effectively, message, development messages, probably done with good intent, but incredibly top-down and naive and patronising. So that's why I stepped out of the INGO after 2 years of working like that. I applied to British Embassy for some independent funding for myself to initiate this participatory process. I'd read about participatory process, I didn't know anything about it. I implemented this project to teach myself about it and work with communities in that way. I would still say today that participatory processes are not really embraced fully when it comes to communication by many NGOs, because they still want to send messages to people. Participatory processes are quite difficult to deal with in organisational context, because people say, well, how long is it going to last? And what budget do you need? And you don't know how long it's going to last sometimes. It could be 6 months, it could be 2 years. It's a participatory community process, and it will move at the speed that the community is able to move at. These are difficult things for NGOs to work with. But I also think it's not just logistical, we still think we know what's best for other people. And just because it's health messages or gender, sexuality messages, it doesn't make it right to tell people what to think or feel. But many NGOs do think they should do that.
The little knowledge that I have of this degree of communication, it seems to have worked well in certain places where the forms of means of communication that have been isolated because of the distance of means of communication. So with this growth of digital technology, mobile phone, this has kind of affected
Well, the first thing I would say is that participatory filmmaking or drama, whatever, we're talking about horizontal communication processes. And that's sort of localized communities. It's your family, it's your community, it's people on the edges of your community that are oppressors perhaps or supporters in some way. So it works best at localized levels. As soon as you start going beyond your immediate communities, then you start slipping into mass media again, don't you? You're using media to reach other people, and the ability then to have dialogue with the people that are receiving your media decreases. Having said that, I'm interested to ask the participants in Patton now, how would they feel about a participatory process where young people now in Patton to be facilitated, maybe by them as facilitators because they know the process. And that would, you're not going to use drama and physical capability for that. Young people today would use social media, wouldn't they, probably? So I'm quite interested to see how participatory communication might work with those types of media. But we're also looking at one other type of project where we might work with a range of communities across Nepal in the high mountains, mid-hills, and looking at the impacts of climate change on their own lives and livelihoods and cultures, and the mitigation strategies they are developing to stay where they are and retain their foothold in their land and their livelihoods and their cultures, and mitigate and change, adapt to the climate change. We use an asset-based approach. Nowadays, the cameras that people have on their phones are far better than the cameras I was using 30 years ago. So an asset-based approach is really important. You don't want to go to a community you disable those people from continuing that process. You mustn't make people dependent on you for continuing the process. So asset-based approaches have a lot of potential when it comes to new media, because people have their phones. So using this methodology, you can work across the whole of Nepal in an asset-based way, with communities making their own films or documenting their own issues around climate change. But then we can collate those centrally in Kathmandu and with participation from representatives from different communities, put them into different sort of issue groups and then build that into a resource that can be used then maybe to advocate for policy change and things like that. So, yeah, horizontal level, but also at a bigger level in an asset-based approach way, I think absolutely.
अध्ययनको पढाइको अध्यापनको सबै अनुभव सहित यहाँ नेपालमा काम गर्नुहुने र लामो वर्ष प्रयास कतिपय कुरो त कति प्र्याक्टिस पनि गरेर पनि हुनसक्छ अलरेडी